Country Watch Political Intelligence Briefing Quick Hits, a weekly briefing of hot stories across the world in brief. I'm Denise Youngblood Coleman, the Editor-in-Chief and Senior International Affairs Analyst at Country Watch. This week, the featured country is the United Kingdom because of the COP26 Climate Summit taking place in Glasgow, Scotland. The host country, the United Kingdom, was pressing participants to recommit to significant emissions reductions by 2030 and net zero emissions by 2050. In this way, the issue of climate change means that we're actually featuring not just the host country, but the 200 countries and territories present at the summit in Glasgow. I'm going to talk today about a dozen of them. So far, COP26 has resulted in landmark deals with regard to coal, deforestation, methane, and green technologies. First of all, 40 countries, not including China, India, Australia, or the United States, have agreed to end the use of coal power. While the United States did not agree to this coal provision, it nonetheless has committed to ending the overseas funding of oil, gas, and coal. Second, more than 100 countries vowed to reverse deforestation by 2030. The goal was ambitious, and came with it was the reminder that an earlier pledge on deforestation in 2014 yielded no meaningful results. Still, with a total of 110 countries making what United Kingdom Prime Minister Boris Johnson called a landmark commitment, there was some cautious optimism. Perhaps the most significant development came with regard to methane. At issue was the global partnership brokered by the United States and the European Union to cut emissions of the greenhouse gas methane by 2030. There were more than 100 signatories to the Global Methane Pledge, which aimed to limit methane emissions by 30% compared with 2020 levels. Methane is regarded as one of the most damaging greenhouse gases. Accordingly, the Global Methane Pledge marks a significant step in the international effort to address the climate emergency. A fourth development was with regard to concurrence reached on funding clean or green technologies. More than 450 organizations representing approximately 40% of global private assets agreed to back clean or green technologies, including renewable energy. So that's the good news. Now the not so good news. The worst of the climate crisis cannot, and I repeat, cannot be mitigated without a concrete plan to contain global temperature rises to 1.5 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial levels. And we have a lot to do on that front, with some scientists warning it might already be too late. Meanwhile, small island nations were sounding the alarm on the immediate existential crises they faced as a result of the climate emergency and the imperative for immediate urgent action. Antigua and Barbuda Prime Minister Gaston Brown emphasized the devastation caused by highly industrialized countries. Brown said, "Our country is paradise, there's no doubt about it. They are unfortunately destroying our pristine environment." He added, "Not only are they destroying lives, they're destroying livelihoods. And if the situation continues, the ultimate situation is losing our lives and losing our civilization in the Caribbean, Pacific, and Indian Oceans." When Brown used the word they, he was intentionally referring to countries whose emissions were so significant they caused devastation. Included on the list would be highly industrialized countries like the United States, Russia, India, and China. Let's be clear. For small island nations, there are two parallel crises unfolding. One was the more immediately discernible crisis, manifest in the extreme weather catastrophes such as deadly hurricanes and flooding, as well as the decimation of biodiversity, including fisheries. The other climate crisis is the existential one, the fact that the rise in sea level due to melting ice caps and warming waters would render many small island nations uninhabitable. Among the countries likely to be affected by increasingly deadly hurricanes were Caribbean island nations like Antigua and Barbuda, Barbados, Grenada, and the other islands of the Windward Lesser Antilles. They would also include United States and European overseas territories like Martinique, Guadeloupe, Saint Martin, the British Virgin Islands, the United States Virgin Islands, and as we've seen tragically, Puerto Rico. Among the countries most likely to be affected by the existential catastrophe caused by increasing sea levels were island nations in the Pacific like Tuvalu, Kiribati, Palau, Vanuatu, and the Marshall Islands. What's going to happen to the people of these islands? Is there even a plan afoot to relocate an entire country, or indeed countries in the plural? Fiji, which was subject to increasingly intense cyclones in recent years, has another set of problems: the economic debt accrued as a result of climate disasters. Satyendra Prasad, Fiji's ambassador to the United Nations, said, "We're expected to take the scale of devastation and face it with a straight face and recover on our own." As a result of the literal climate emergency being faced by small island nations, a key issue on the agenda for the discussion at COP26 was funding for loss and damage as a result of irreversible harms caused by climate change. Loss and damage compensation has long been a controversial issue. While the world's richest nations said they would earmark $100 billion a year to help vulnerable countries mitigate climate emergencies and adapt to climate change, they have not met those goals. Furthermore, the world's richest countries to date have been disinterested in loss and damage funding for those vulnerable countries. Under the aegis of the 2015 Paris Climate Accord, language was included acknowledging the importance of averting, minimizing, and addressing loss and damage associated with the adverse effects of climate change. But industrialized countries also included another provision stating that the Paris Agreement did not involve or provide any basis for any liability or compensation. By 2021, amid the alarming rapidity of rising seas, the devastation brought by hurricanes and flooding, intensifying heat waves, and increasingly catastrophic forest fires, as well as other climate-related destruction and harm, the matter was re-emerging with urgency, along with questions of how to provide funding. Prime Minister Brown of Antigua and Barbuda indicated to Axios News that he had discussed the matter with the United States Secretary of State Tony Blinken and noted that the United States top diplomat was receptive. Nevertheless, Brown emphasized that he did not want his country to have to rely on random acts of charity. Accordingly, Antigua and Barbuda, along with Tuvalu, announced that they were using the international system of jurisprudence to garner compensation from major carbon emitters. While the United States was among those major carbon emitters, a former United States president was at COP26 and among those adding his voice to the plight of island nations. President Barack Obama, present in Glasgow, declared, "I have been shaped by my experience growing up in Hawaii. We have to act now to help with adaptation and resilience." Referring to small island nations as the canary in the coal mine, Obama noted that rich countries of the world had an added burden to make sure we are working with and helping and assisting those who are less responsible and less able but more vulnerable to this oncoming crisis. I'll cover some of the other stories going on in the world in more detail next week. Among them, the passage of the landmark bipartisan infrastructure package in Congress in the United States, which is slated for signature into law by the president. Ethiopia being in the state of national emergency as Tigrayan rebels advance on the capital. The continued popular resistance against the coup d'etat in Sudan. The attempted assassination by drone attack of Iraqi Prime Minister Kadhimi. The death of a senior Taliban commander killed in an ISK terror attack in Afghanistan. The border crises between Belarus on one hand and Poland and the Baltics on the other, and elections in Nicaragua with Ortega on a glide path to victory. I'd also like to take this time to mention my comprehensive Afghanistan withdrawal report called Sunset in the Graveyard of Empires, which will soon be available for purchase from the Country Watch website at www.countrywatch.com. Thank you for your time. Have a great day, and remember now, more than ever, we live in an interconnected world.